The BRICS summit in Johannesburg in 2023, there have been some big decisions. There are new members of BRICS. There's big decisions about financial systems. Does it spell the beginning of a new world order? Does it spell the end of the dominance of the US dollar? There has been a lot of speculation. There have been a lot of confident opinions. What are you to think? Well, it's one of those issues where you can really benefit from using a bit of good quality world history to see and imagine the world clearly. It might even be one of those situations where one might imagine a world with no hegemon. My name's Jeff Rich. This is the Burning Archive YouTube channel. I also do the Burning Archive podcast every week on Spotify and all good platforms. Check it out. And you can also check out my website, theburningarchive.com, where I have all my writings, links to my books, my articles, the podcast, the YouTube channel, and my online course on mindful history. So do check those things out. But let's talk about BRICS, shall we? So the BRICS summit has just been held in Johannesburg in South Africa, and some people are speculating that it is the end of the American rules-based international order. And some people equally confidently are saying, no, it will not affect American dominance. What does it all mean? Peter Zeihan, for example, has dismissed the BRICS as really a sideshow. What are you to make of it? Well, the agreed decisions of the BRICS summit are set out in a communique called the Johannesburg II Declaration. And its preamble states that the principles of the institutions of this new multipolar world that they are trying to bring into being, it states what those principles are. It announces, if you like, a new stage of maturity of the BRICS as an organization. BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It's been going for 10 to 15 years, and this summit is a crucial summit in its history. It's the first in-person summit since COVID, and it has announced a major expansion of BRICS. That's what all the fuss is about. In the preamble, they state that we further commit ourselves to strengthening the framework of mutually beneficial BRICS cooperation under the three pillars of political and security, economic and financial, and cultural and people-to-people cooperation, and to enhancing our strategic partnership for the benefit of our people through the promotion of peace, a more representative, fairer international order, important words there, a reinvigorated and reformed multilateral system, again important words, sustainable development and inclusive growth. Fine rhetoric, what does it really mean? It's important to note that this preamble does not call for BRICS or any one country of BRICS to be the new world leader. Some people are getting carried away dismissing BRICS, like Peter Zeihan. Some people are also getting carried away with turning this event, this summit of leaders, this effectively bureaucratic meeting or political or diplomatic meeting into a history-changing event. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. But this preamble doesn't call for BRICS to replace America as the leader of the world. It instead calls for new ways of peaceful development for the world that genuinely enable all the world to flourish, not just the West. it's a reasoned moral challenge, if you like, to the leaders of the West. And so far, I'm not sure all Western leaders have really risen to the challenge. There was a lot of sort of media briefing before the summit that kind of implied that there was a lot of more division between the BRICS leaders than eventually it turned out to be the case. And a number of commentators have made the point that it would be a grave error to demonize the BRICS, especially now that it is expanding to be BRICS 11 or perhaps even more soon. But similarly, it would be a grave error to turn BRICS into a bigger, more important, more effective organisation than it truly is. Let's have a little look at the actual detail of what's in this communique, what it was actually decided and agreed upon by the leaders of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. There are there are 7 sections of this declaration. The first is the preamble, which includes the principles I talked about before. The second is a partnership for inclusive multilateralism, and this includes criticisms of unilateral coercive measures incompatible with the principles of the Charter of the UN. What they really mean is the kind of sanctions that have been applied to Russia, to China, and to other states around the world, to Iran, which has just become a member of the BRICS. And this section also has a very strong focus on reform of the international organisations, including the United Nations, such as the United Nations Security Council and the World Trade Organization and the International Monetary Fund. The third section is fostering an environment for peace and development, where they talk about the peaceful resolution of differences and disputes through dialogue and inclusive consultations. And this section you might think would be all about Ukraine, but it's not. It actually gives more weight to conflicts in Africa, the Middle East, Haiti, than Ukraine. And it also puts a lot of emphasis on the role of women and the prevention of nuclear war rather than the promotion of the sort of G7 model of democracy. The next section is the Partnership for Mutually Accelerated Growth, and this is the one that has attracted a lot of discussion about whether BRICS will spell the end of the US dollar's reserve currency status. In this section, they talk about multilateral economic cooperation, and they include decisions to do more work and prepare proposals on local currencies, payment instruments, and platforms, as well as further development of a common bank like the IMF or the World Bank, called the National Development Bank, that supports all those BRICS nations. The next section is called Partnership for Sustainable Development, and there are declarations on the importance of the sort of United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, on climate change, on healthcare, on pandemic prevention, preparedness and response. And for all these countries, international conflicts over vaccines and all that sort of thing, the supply of medications, the cost of medications to developing countries has been a big issue. But it also talks about education and skills, science and technology, and energy. Then there is a section on deepening people-to-people exchanges, which has initiatives to deepen people-to-people exchanges in business, media, culture, education, sports, including the BRICS Games in October 2023, arts, youth, civil society, and academic exchanges. If we all talk to each other in different countries, then perhaps we can resolve our differences through dialogue rather than through war or economic sanctions. Then the final section of the communique is the one that's probably provoked the most news, and that is called institutional development. And this is where they set out both the kind of processes and the decisions on expanding BRICS membership, and also the process for selecting new BRICS members or BRICS partners. Overall, it's an elegantly constructed declaration. Its rhetoric is of pluralism, generosity between countries with different values, and peaceful development that benefits the whole world, especially the global south, which countries have suffered, after all, from decisions by the West. This rhetoric is far more appealing than the harsh tones of, for example, the NATO Vilnius Summit Declaration, which had a lot of focus on military expansion into the Indo-Pacific, the rhetoric of democracy versus autocracy, and some fairly harsh words towards China and Russia as uncivilized states. The two big decisions of consequence for the international system, the international order, for geopolitics that were widely speculated on before the summit and led some to anticipate a historic turning point were BRICS expansion and de-dollarization. De-dollarization is a term, pretty ugly term, to use to describe the reduced reliance on the US dollar as the reserve currency in the world, the main reserve currency in the world. And I've actually done a podcast on the whole idea of the US dollar as a reserve currency, so do check that out. Now, on both issues, I would say that the declaration didn't make big, flashy news, but it did reveal a patient method going forward. It wasn't all about publicity-seeking drama, big announcements and press conferences on the day. It was about a longer-term process of making this multilateral institution of the BRICS strong, effective, and a cooperative arrangement between these countries to see a more equal balance of power in the world between these countries and the wealthy Western countries represented in the G7 along with Japan. Now, let's have a look at both of those key points a little more clearly in terms of what was actually decided and what the consequences of it are before we have a little look at how looking clearly with a bit of world history can help us, or using a little bit of quality world history can help us see this world that's changing before our eyes more clearly. How we might even be able to imagine a different, even maybe more peaceful world if we use that kind of quality history. First of all, let's look at BRICS expansion. Now, 6 countries will become full members of BRICS in January 2024 as a result of decisions at this summit. These countries are Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, very important that inclusion, and the United Arab Emirates. Now, these states may now be considered, I guess, middle powers in the world, and they will participate in next year's BRICS summit, which will be held in Kazan in Russia. And moreover, the summit has agreed a set of rules, processes, and arrangements to agree on further expansion of the membership of BRICS. The South African leader and chair of the summit, Cyril Ramaphosa, emphasized in the final press conference that these rules and processes will support a further phase of expansion, and that may even be ratified at the 2024 summit, which is expected to be held in October 2024, a month or so before the US presidential election. Leaders also tasked foreign ministers to develop a BRICS partners program, and so with all those extra things, we may well expect that by 2025, now BRICS has already, the economies of BRICS on GDP purchasing power parity terms are already bigger than the G7 nations. But by 2025, it may well be that we can expect BRICS to represent more than 40% of the world economy and over half of the world's population. So they are a very, very substantial, important organisation in the world now. Absolutely one of the top tier multilateral organisations in the world. The second big decision point was around this issue of de-dollarisation, or the financial systems of currencies and payments in the world. Here, the leaders of the different countries have strengthened the role of the new development bank and the BRICS contingent reserve arrangement, both of which to some degree are sort of independent ways of operating separate from the IMF and the World Bank, which have a long history of, I guess, perhaps alienating developing nations in their sort of approach to economic development. Critically and patiently, leaders task their finance ministers and central bankers to develop a set of proposals by next year's summit on national currencies, payment systems and platforms. So the big decisions on de-dollarisation are not. There has been no new BRICS currency announced. There has been no overthrow of the US dollar announced. What has been announced is, well, there's a whole series of sort of, bilateral decisions by countries to do trade with each other in their own currencies. And there is agreement with this new expanded organisation that includes Saudi Arabia and other major petrol exporting countries to develop new systems for national currencies, payment systems and platforms by next year's summit. They're working towards a very complex set of proposals, and they're going to be coming to some kind of agreement within this new group of 11 countries around that arrangement over the next 12 months. Another way of putting this is that next year in Kazan, in Russia, the fates of the petrodollar, and let me just take a step back and say people talk about the petrodollar to describe really how the international reserve currency system has operated in the world since kind of 1971, 1973, when the United States took the dollar off the gold standard and kind of floated the currency freely. And although it might seem that it would be connected to no substantial thing, just a declaration, a fiat currency, in practice it was heavily related to the agreement of Saudi Arabia and other oil-producing states to trade oil, petrol, the fundamental commodity, regrettably in many ways, because, carbon and all that sort of stuff, but in practice and in reality, the fundamental commodity without which any economy in the world can last very long. Oil is always traded in US dollars, and that is starting to change. But that system people describe as the petrodollar. So next year, the fate of the petrodollar and with it Western financial dominance of the world will be decided by a summit that will comprise the economies the West rejects, so to speak, all those economies that have had heavy sanctions placed upon them. And these OPEC, the sort of organization that brings together all the petrol-producing states, the oil-producing powers, these OPEC powers, Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. It sounds to me like there is a real patient method here that will ultimately lead to very, very significant change. It doesn't necessarily mean BRICS currency will now overthrow the US dollar sort of reserve currency system. And do check out my podcast on the US dollar empire to have more of a discussion about all of that. But it does mean there will be big, slow, and fundamental changes. This patient method that the BRICS is employing is broadening their networks and their resource base sustainably, their power base sustainably. The careful husbandry of the energy of these new networks will change world history. The dream of a flat world under the leadership of the United States and its liberal rules-based order has been exposed, I think, as a misunderstanding of the history of globalization. And here, if we can use a little bit of quality world history to see the world more clearly, I think it's worth having a look at an important book written by John Darwin, After Tamerlan, which I've included in my 5 top books for how geopolitics can help you understand, or how the 5 top history books to help you understand geopolitics today. This book by John Darwin really has an important observation about what really happened over the last 50 years, I guess, as people spoke about globalization and they spoke about the unipolar world. And John Darwin says in that book, the magnetic force of the global economy has been too erratic thus far and too unevenly felt to impose the cooperative behaviour and cultural fusion to which theorists of free trade have often looked forward. What we call globalisation today might be candidly seen as flowing from a set of recent agreements, some tacit, some formal, between the 4 great economic empires of the contemporary world: America, Europe, Japan, and China. That is from a book called After Tamerlan, The Rise and Fall of Global Empires, 1400 to 2000, published in 2007. I've got a great video on it. You can check it out wherever the little card is, and also check out my video on the 5 top history books to understand geopolitics today. But it's a really important observation. And what seems to have happened over the last maybe 15 years is that those set of agreements between the 4 great economic empires of the contemporary world have broken down, and the set of great states, the set of great powers of the world, the new superpowers of the world, have changed. China's much more important. India's much more important. Russia's got itself off the catastrophic events of the 1990s and is much more important as well. A new, plural, diverse world order is taking shape, and BRICS, and that is what we're seeing at BRICS Johannesburg. It is it is not a historic turning point. It is not a dramatic turning point, but it does toll the bell for all those, all the dreams of the unipolar American dominance of the world. However, it does not mean that the story of an expanding BRICS is the rise of a new hegemon. Critically, the BRICS declaration states that they want to operate within the framework of the United Nations and international law. They do not need to become the rulers of the world. They only need to convince the West that it can live peacefully in a world without a single hegemon. It's kind of like the strategy. What's the strategy that the United States is using? The United States has to consume an enormous amount of energy to be the dominant unipower controller of the world. If people don't want to have that much dominance, it's that they don't actually have to invest so much. All they need to do is to make it unsustainable for the United States to continue that strategy, and it's very, very hard for the United States to keep that strategy sustainably over time. The United States geostrategists, the foreign policy people, the leadership elites of the United States really made a disastrous miscalculation about world history after 1989. They kind of declared their independence from the international system in the early 1990s and tried to live in this unipolar world, this flat world, this Netflix world, this world of the international rules-based order where anyone who would challenge the United States dominance across all spectrums would be crushed. And this misunderstanding of the kind of forces of history and the nature of the unique moment in the 1990s that John Darwin described in After Tamerlane in that quote I gave earlier on. This misunderstanding of history led to the catastrophes in Iraq, Afghanistan, Ukraine, and indeed, I hope it's not the case, but what seems to be the looming war that at least some in America want to fight with China. Now, the BRICS nations, it seems to me, and of course I could be wrong, but on the evidence that I've seen, the BRICS nations do not suffer that same illusion. They are not trying to control the whole world. They merely need to counter the unilateral power that the US has used sufficiently for the American unipolar strategy to be no longer viable. And this is the decisive importance of Russia's success in countering the US economic war, and indeed also of India's success and its strength and its resilience in resisting the related diplomatic pressure against India around economic sanctions on Russia. There are now enough counterweights in the world to force, ultimately, eventually, to force the United States and other G7 or other Western nations genuinely back to the path of multilateral dialogue and diplomacy. BRICS nations do not need to be a new hegemon, but they just need to force the United States elites to change their mind. Let's see how they go with that. BRICS expansion by deepening cooperation outside the G7 is lifting all boats. and it's slowly drowning the American exceptionalism that has dominated American foreign policy for way too long. That American exceptionalism now looks like King Canute sitting in his throne on the beach in medieval England saying, I'm going to stop the waves of history coming in. American exceptionalism is drowning like King Canute sinking stubbornly in the seat of its golden throne despite the surging waves of history. Will the elites of the United States drown on that golden throne, or will they save their own people who have their own issues, after all, from disaster, and allow them to join the peaceful flotilla of the multipolar world? If you're interested in that question, that's the kind of thing I try to follow on this channel, and I try to follow it with a bit of quality world history so that you can imagine the complex, wonderful, diverse, multipolar world a little bit more clearly with a bit of quality world history. Do like, share, and subscribe. My name's Jeff Rich. Check out the links in my profile to my website, to my Substack, and to my online course on mindful history, and also to my books, including my recently published 13 Ways of Looking at a Bureaucrat, writing on government. And before I forget, also check out my interview with Felipe Fernandez Armesto. He has a brilliant discussion of the changing multipolar world and some of the issues it presents for America. You can check that out right there. Okay, see you in the next video.